What's happening, everybody? Brent Axe here from syracuse.com, and we are live here on the syracuse.com Syracuse basketball Facebook page, coming off the heels here of a gut punch loss for Syracuse in Tallahassee, a game that goes to double overtime, but the Orange lose 101-90. So we are here on Facebook Live, as you can see, if you're just joining us as we're getting going here. You got a couple of choices in terms of what you want to do to participate. You can hang back and watch, or better yet, why don't you get in that comment section and tell us what you think about this one. There's a lot to digest from this loss for the Orange, and we'll jump right back into the conversations here and into the comments as we go. Please like and share this post as well. Let people know that we are here live. If you are watching a little bit later on, we do archive and replay this and put it on YouTube and all that fun stuff. You can still share it. We would appreciate it if you would share the video and people can kind of circle back and watch here. But bottom line, the Orange have lost 4 straight games. They're now 1-4 in ACC play. They are 12-6 overall, and we're kind of getting to that cut line for the Syracuse basketball team. Nobody wants to decide anything in mid-January. There's a lot of basketball to be played, but Syracuse is really running out of opportunities to pick up signature wins, big wins. They've put themselves behind the 8 ball in ACC play, despite a monster effort in the second half and the first overtime. Things kind of fell apart in the second overtime for the Orange. I mean, look, if you want to start with a positive note, it's nice that Syracuse played in a game with a final score of 101-90 after all these games in the 60s and 50s, and you go back to just their last game against Virginia, and we thought that would be a high-scoring game at 68-61. But there's a lot to take away from this one, so let's jump right in here. Tyus Battle with 37 points, a career high for him, hits a three-pointer at the end of regulation to tie it at 74. But in overtime, you know, Brissett, he was double covered. He had some guys on him, dishes off to Tyus Battle to O'Shea Brissett, who's got a wide-open shot. And I think this is the moment we're going to circle back on here. There's a lot of things we can discuss as we will here as we go along, and you guys are talking about here in the comments here. Brissett's wide open, and he's got either a three-point shot, which if he makes, pretty much sinks Florida State's battleship at that point, or if he drives in, maybe gives himself a little bit better of a shot, but a loss would go to double overtime, and that's when Florida State really put the clamps down on this one. So Battle ends up with 37 points. What an effort for him, as he had been struggling on the offensive end, was 0 for 7 from three-point range in his last game, and, you know, teams had started to really focus on him on the defensive end, and he needed a breakout game. He needed to reassure himself today, and he more than did that. This is a guy, by the way, that had 5 points at halftime. He scores 32 points in the second half and the overtimes of this game, and the big reason why was he got hot from three-point range. Had 5 3-pointers in this game and really got going. And, you know, this is a guy who, Donna DeToda had a great statistical breakdown of this right here on syracuse.com on Friday, and that a lot of his three-point shots were coming off passes and were coming off, you know, drive and dish situations. He created his shot a lot today. He pulled up, hit that three-pointer, kind of bucked that trend a little bit in this game. So what a monster effort for Tyus Battle in this game, no question about it. Matthew Moyer, 7 points, 10 rebounds. Pascal Chukwu at 10 points and 11 rebounds. Frank Howard fouled out of this game. One of 3 Syracuse players to follow out. Mentioned Moyer, Pascal Chukwu fouled out, as did Frank Howard, which opened up things for Howard Washington, who, despite the fact he had 5 turnovers, Syracuse played the 3-guard offense a lot in this game. And I think Howard Washington showed that he deserves more minutes. I think Howard Washington shows that Jim Boeheim does not have to play Frank Howard 38 minutes a game. Now, Jim Boeheim, and a lot of the answers to questions about Jim Boeheim go back to defense, and that 3-guard lineup, maybe you suffer a little bit on defense. And I think some of the fears that Boeheim brought up about Howard Washington came into fruition when he had 5 turnovers in this game. But as a young guard, he's trying to make things happen. They weren't all bad turnovers, unforced errors. So I think Howard Washington, you know, really proved in this game that he deserves some more minutes here. But what I'm wondering is, when do you get to the point when you still think you're an NCAA tournament team? And when do you get to the point where, even though you're trying to win every game that's in front of you, you start thinking about the future a little bit and giving a guy like Howard Washington some more minutes? But he stepped up big when Frank Howard, you know, not only was struggling a bit earlier in the game, but when he fouled out, they needed Washington to come in and give him quality minutes, and I think for the most part he did that. Really telling stat in this game, and there's a lot in a overtime game, a double overtime game at that, to sink in, but a really telling stat is points off turnovers. So in this game, Syracuse committed 19 turnovers, and Florida State had 31 points off of those 19 turnovers. Syracuse collected 15 turnovers from Florida State and got just 12 points off of those turnovers. So that's a key stat there. Syracuse closed the rebounding gap. Florida State really got on the boards early, but Syracuse, kind of collapsed that stat and took that back. And, look, let's just say it. The officiating in this game was awful. And it was awful both ways. The flagrant one on Howard Washington was a joke in the overtime session there, giving Florida State, a couple of free shots there and a possession, which, possessions are gold in a situation like that. Florida State was hand-checking the whole game. There was a point in the first half where Syracuse was getting a bunch of whistles and couldn't do what they do, couldn't do a pick and roll, they completely took Syracuse out of their game. In no way did it cost Syracuse this game. In no way did I think it aided Florida State in winning in the end there and in overtime. But, if you just want to assess how this thing was, and essentially almost 2 games here. You play, 2 halves of basketball and 2 overtimes, so like 2.5 games really. The officiating was abysmal in this game, and officiating has been abysmal in college basketball all year long. And I know it's easy for fans to pick on officials. We get 14 replays and we can see things, but look, it's their job to spot this stuff on the court. It's their job to make the right call, and nobody's 100%, nobody's perfect. I understand that, but it's not just Syracuse, by the way. If you watch a lot of college basketball like I do, it's just every night. Every night, the officiating it's terrible. It has been terrible in college basketball this year. And, football, there's always a call or two every weekend that we discuss on Monday after all the playoff games. So, look, it's amazing to me with all the technology we have and the advancements that we're at that, humans are still flawed and they still make bad calls. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Florida State ended up with 23 offensive rebounds in this game. Now, you go back to the Notre Dame game, and they were all over the offensive glass. So maybe Jim Boeheim was right in saying that Syracuse being a good rebounding team was a myth. After the Notre Dame game, you certainly thought that, but Syracuse bounced back in the Virginia game, got back on the boards as they should, but Florida State tonight back on the glass. Now, I mentioned Syracuse closed the rebounding gap overall, but the offensive rebounding gap, a huge advantage for Florida State in this game tonight. And here's an interesting trend that has happened for Syracuse. In sports in general and in college basketball in particular, you need to take advantage of breaks when you can. And injuries are part of sports. They're part of the game. What's interesting to me is here in ACC play, and Syracuse is only 5 games into ACC play, but 1-4. And, as Yogi Berra once said, it's getting late early for the Orange here. Let's go back a little bit here. Wake Forest didn't have their best player for most of the game. Notre Dame did not have Bonzie Colson or Matt Farrell at all, and Notre Dame won that basketball game. Florida State, lo and behold, we come into this game and we find out that Terrence Mann is out. Leading point getter, leading rebounder for Florida State. Now, Florida State is a really talented team, and they can get by and win games without Terrence Mann. But I just find it interesting that Syracuse has had 3 games here early on in ACC play where they faced a team that didn't have their best player. 3 times now this has happened. And Notre Dame, it was their top 2 players in that game. Now, that being said, how about Kumaji? 23 points. Angola with 24 points in this game. He hits 4 3-pointers. Kofor with the big 3-pointers late for Florida State. So this is a talented Florida State team that had a number of guys kind of step up with Terrence Mann being out. But it's interesting to note that you've had 3 teams now in ACC play that Syracuse faced that didn't have their best player. And the reason I bring that up is not only because it's certainly noteworthy. Syracuse is a team that is going to win games with its defense. Now, this game got wild, and it just turned into, a free-for-all in the second half. And once you get into overtime, it's, a lot of your trends and everything just go out the window, and it's who got the ball last. And Syracuse couldn't score in that second overtime, so it really killed him there. But look, Syracuse is going to win games with defense. And you know what the halftime score of this game is? Anybody remember? It was 31-21. 31-21. Syracuse had 21 points at halftime. A Syracuse team that has struggled, as we have seen, on the offensive end all year long. And they end up with 90 points in this game. Almost what? Do the math on that. 70 points in the second half in the overtime. So maybe just a product of this game, maybe encouraging that Syracuse can score a little bit. And they're not going to be in the 50s and 60s game in and game out. But it took a gargantuan effort from Tyus Battle for them to get there. So I think those things kind of average out here. So, you know, let's take a look at some comments here, and then we'll make a few more points before we exit stage left here. Let's see. Mary Ellen says, we always play the officials. It stinks. Tough loss again for the Orange. Garth agrees on the hand checks all night. All night, Garth. Hand checks everywhere, and they didn't call it. That was really frustrating. SJ says officiating's been bad in the ACC. Great officiating in the Big East. Oh, that's good to know. Maybe we shouldn't have left the Big East, right? It's funny how that always comes up from people. It's just like, you $25 million a year in free money. You can't turn that down. Although, sometimes I miss the old Big East. I see that ESPN 30 for 30 come up once in a while, and I say, ooh, those are the days, right? But, you can't go back. Syracuse is where they should be at this point. Roland asks in the comments here, do you think they're still a tournament team? And my answer is absolutely not. This is not an NCAA tournament team because they don't have enough scorers. Syracuse does have good guard play at times, not consistently. They can't seem to get Tyus Battle and Frank Howard on the same page. Howard Washington showing that he can come in and maybe give this team some quality minutes, something to watch going down the stretch here. But while their resume is better than last year, you've got to pick up. This would have been a big resume builder for Syracuse. Their RPI has been good. Their strength of schedule has been good. But, this would have been a win over a ranked team. And I mentioned the opportunities that were there against Notre Dame and Virginia. And Syracuse is just – they're not picking up enough big wins here. There's opportunities to do it here. They get Virginia again. They get Duke. They get North Carolina. They get Louisville. It's not like opportunities are lost there. But you're 1-4 in ACC play. You're 12-6. I don't think they're a tournament team, but here's something that's encouraging, and I think Jim Boeheim mentioned this at his post-game press conference a little bit. Syracuse in these games, they have lost 4 in a row, but they're not getting their doors blown off here. They're not out of these games. It's not like we're walking away from these games saying they don't belong on the court with these teams. With this game, certainly an exception to the rule, but in the 3 games prior to that, you look at it and you say they just don't have enough scorers. They just don't have enough guys. They're just that short. And you know what that really is? It's this team needs offense. And think of the players they lost through the course of the year. Torian Thompson, before the season even started, would have made such a huge difference on this team. The inside-out play, ball movement would have been better. Certainly, Syracuse would have a viable offensive threat inside, which they don't right now. Pascal Chukwu is just not that guy. He's great off the boards. He had a great game tonight for Syracuse, not taking anything away that he does. But, he missed another dunk. He can't catch the ball. He's not a viable offensive threat. Marek Dolzaj has disappeared on the offensive end, which I guess was to be expected when Syracuse got to ACC play. Matthew Moyer can score, but is not a threat there. Think if this team had Torian Thompson. Geno Thorpe, how he could have complemented this team at guard play, hit some threes off the bench. He left on his own accord. It's all on him, and we wish him well wherever he is now. But the fact of the matter is, this team just doesn't have enough bullets in the gun. And despite that, they're in every game. They are in every game they play. So it's encouraging, but after a while, you got to stop, patting them on the back for the old college try. And you got to win some of these games. And this was a game right there in their hands. Just like Virginia was kind of there. Notre Dame was a game where opportunity not losing at Wake Forest. They're all close games, and that's good that they're staying in these games. But my question is, okay, so let's look ahead here. This team just played a double overtime game and is exhausted and is not a deep team to start. So you got a quick turnaround on Tuesday night. Well, you play Pitt Tuesday night. Dan points out in the comments, Tyler Lydon leaving this team was killer, but was expected. I almost forget to even mention him because I think we all expected he was going to go to the NBA. But, had you had Tyler Lydon stick around one more year, I mean, this would be a top 10 team potentially if all those guys are around. Talent and scoring makes a big difference, but that's just the reality of college hoops today. What else we got here in the comment section? Foul Breeze says, college players going to come and go. You just have to move on and use what you have. That's absolutely right. Speaking of which, you don't want to look over the horizon too much here because there's a lot to come in this season, but you've got some great players coming in next year. In Jalen Carey, who's a 4-star guard, Darius Bazley, a 5-star player, is one of the highest recruited players and rated players that Syracuse has had in years, and Buddy Boeheim, who can stick the 3. So I think you're going to add some depth next year, even if Tyus Battle leaves, which, look, that's a question at this point. I haven't really checked in fully with my NBA scout friends that I have and contacts that I have that I keep in touch with during the year. I'm going to have to do that here soon just to kind of get a sense of where Tyus Battle is at. I wanted to wait a few ACC games before we did that. I think, after tonight, they'd be very complimentary of him, right? But, Tyus can't go to his left. He's inconsistent shooting the ball. To really make your mark as an NBA prospect, particularly a first-round NBA prospect, you've got to have something that really stands out about your game. What do you hang your hat on? And I think Tyus is still looking for that. It would probably be he can penetrate, he can get in the lane. He's just a dynamic offensive player, but he's got to round out some of these things. So Tyus is going to be an interesting prospect to follow in that sense over the next 2 months, because even at this time last year, you really started to really get the sense that Tyler Lydon was going to leave. He just had the look. He was getting great buzz from NBA people. He always found himself, somewhere in that kind of 16 to 25 range in the mock drafts, and that's where he ended up going. So we'll keep an eye on that for sure. But just to go back to something I was saying a moment ago, you got Pitt Tuesday night. Pitt is awful. They have a losing record. They got an 0 for going here in ACC play, but there's always a game or two that you drop along the way in conference play that you just shouldn't. You're tired. You're in a tough stretch. You just don't play well that night. It can't be that game. So Syracuse has put a lot of pressure on themselves here because you've got a stretch coming up with Pitt, Boston College, Pitt again. So 2 of your next 3 games are against the worst team in the ACC. And Georgia Tech on the other end, who is not, having a year up to Josh Pastner's standards there and is kind of near the bottom of the league, but never an easy team to beat, for sure. You've put yourself in a position where you have to go, boy, I want to say 4-0, but to be realistic, you got to go 3-1. You got to go 3-1 in this stretch coming up and kind of right the ship and then, take a deep breath for the other big stretch coming up. This is another overtime loss for Syracuse this year. They've gone to overtime a bunch this year, which is interesting how much they've done that. And, all these things add up as you go, and strength of schedule and wins you got to have. And in ACC play, Syracuse, all 4 of their losses are games they absolutely could have won. Maybe the Virginia game was one that Syracuse, was kind of outmatched and maybe they weren't going to win that one, but they stayed in it. But you can legitimately say Wake Forest, Notre Dame, and this one today were games Syracuse could have had and really needed at this point. Ryan says if Syracuse could use Pascal like Florida State did their big man, I think he'd be a big force for Syracuse. Also think Battle keeps the ball in his hand too much. I'd like to see the guards use Pascal in the pick and roll. He rolls, but they seem not to even look at him. Ryan, he makes some good points there, but the reason they don't is he can't catch the ball. He cannot catch the ball consistently, and you need somebody to do that in order to run that pick and roll successfully. Not only that, when he comes up on the pick and roll, he gets in the way a lot. He's not setting hard picks. So they can't use Pascal like Florida State used their big man today, Kumanji, because Kumanji is much better with the ball. He had a career high himself today, and he makes his dunks. When he's around the hoop, he makes the plays he needs to make. So I think you make a fair point, but Syracuse just doesn't have the consistency on the offensive end out of Pascal Chukwu. He's more of a get rebounds kind of guy. You can feed him the ball right near the hoop, but that pick and roll just isn't working at this point. So this is a tough one. This is, they all count the same in the standings, but this is a really tough loss for Syracuse. They fall to 1-4 in ACC play. They're 12-6 overall. I mentioned it briefly there. Back at it Tuesday night at the Carrier Dome against Pittsburgh. So we will join you again then. Come join us here on Facebook Live. after that game Tuesday night when the Orange take on the Panthers. Look for my recap on syracuse.com on Sunday morning. Always comes up the day after the game, so we'll get to work on that, and you can check that out tomorrow and all of our great coverage here on syracuse.com. Thanks for joining us here on Facebook Live. We'll talk to you again Tuesday night after the Orange take on the Pitt Panthers, see if they can get back on track here after losing a fourth straight game today.